If you break every bottle, you'll win the Cheyenne woman. The stranger took the challenge and won. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow across the dusty town of Red Rock. A small settlement at the edge of the frontier, Red Rock was a place where the tough survived and the weak didn't last long. The people here had seen their share of outlaws, settlers, and travelers, but today a stranger was coming to town. No one knew his name and no one seemed to care. What mattered was that he was about to walk into the most dangerous challenge of his life. The saloon doors creaked as the stranger stepped inside. His boots, worn from years of travel, echoed on the wooden floor. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by time and hardship. His dark eyes scanned the room, taking in the faces of the men who had already gathered. A few nodded in greeting, but most simply looked away, uninterested. There were whispers, though, and everyone in the room had heard the stories of the Cheyenne woman. Her name was Tala, and she was unlike any woman in Red Rock. Strong, fearless, and fiercely independent, Tala had become something of a legend in these parts. Some said she could shoot a gun faster than a man could blink, others claimed she could break any challenge placed before her, but the most famous tale of all was the one about the bottles. For as long as anyone could remember, there had been a challenge at the Red Rock Saloon. A line of bottles, each one placed carefully on the bar, waiting for the right man to step up and break them. But there was one rule. To win Tala's heart, a man had to break every single bottle in one shot. No one had ever succeeded. The stranger knew what he was walking into, and as the saloon doors slammed shut behind him, the murmurs of the crowd grew louder. A man stood at the bar, leaning on his cane, grinning with the kind of smile that made everyone in the room uneasy. "Well, stranger, you look like the kind of man who might want a challenge," the old man said, his voice raspy but filled with a strange sense of amusement. The stranger didn't respond at first, but the eyes of the room were on him. He could feel the weight of their expectations, their curiosity. Finally, he spoke. "What's the challenge?" he asked, his voice low but steady. The old man's grin widened. He motioned toward the bar, where a row of glass bottles stood in a neat line. Some were tall, some small, but all were fragile. The stranger could see the gleam of sunlight reflecting off them. A test of precision and skill, this challenge was not one to be taken lightly. "Break every bottle," the old man said, "and you'll win the Cheyenne woman, Tala. Break 'em all, and she's yours. Fail, and, well, let's just say you won't be the first to try." The saloon went silent. The old man had spoken with such confidence, as if no one had ever come close to completing the challenge. Most men would have walked away, but the stranger didn't move. He simply stared at the bottles, sizing them up. The room buzzed with excitement as the stranger stepped forward, his eyes locked on the bottles. It was clear that no one believed he could do it. They had seen too many men fail, too many who had tried and fallen short, but something about the stranger was different. He was calm, focused, as though the challenge was nothing more than a simple test. Without another word, the stranger reached for his gun. The sound of the holster snapping open echoed in the room, and every eye in the saloon was on him. Tala, who had been sitting in the back corner watching the stranger, stood up slowly. Her eyes narrowed as she observed him. She wasn't one to judge a man based on rumors, but this stranger seemed different. The old man chuckled and stepped aside. "You've got guts, stranger, but don't think it'll be that easy. No one's ever broken all the bottles. And that's not even the hardest part."
The stranger didn't reply. He didn't need to.
He was focused, his hands steady as he lifted his gun. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the first bottle shattered with a sharp crack. The sound of glass breaking filled the air, but the stranger didn't pause. He moved quickly, expertly, breaking the next bottle with the same precision. One by one, the bottles fell. The tension in the room grew thicker with each shot. The stranger's aim was flawless, and for a moment it seemed as though he might actually succeed. The people in the saloon began to whisper to each other, disbelief spreading across their faces. "Impossible," one man muttered. "No one's ever done it." But the stranger didn't flinch. He was in the zone, each shot faster than the last. The bottles were gone, one after another, until only the last one remained. It was the smallest of them all, perched at the farthest end of the bar. The stranger took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing as he steadied his aim. In that moment, everything seemed to stop. The world outside the saloon faded away. There was only him, the bottle, and the challenge. With a smooth, practiced motion, the stranger squeezed the trigger. The bottle exploded into 1,000 pieces, sending shards of glass flying across the room. The saloon erupted into cheers and gasps of astonishment. The crowd surged forward, clapping him on the back, shouting words of praise. But through it all, Tala remained still, her eyes fixed on the stranger. He had done it. He had broken every bottle, just as the old man had said. The challenge was over, and the prize, Tala, was now his.
But Tala didn't move. She didn't smile or clap like the others.
She simply watched him with a look of quiet curiosity. The stranger knew that breaking the bottles was only the beginning. He had won her challenge, but he had yet to earn her respect. As the applause died down, the stranger finally spoke. "Now, when do I meet the Cheyenne woman?" The saloon fell silent once again. Tala's gaze shifted, and for the first time she smiled, a small, knowing smile. "You've met her already," she said, her voice soft but clear. "But if you want to truly win me, stranger, you'll have to prove you're more than just a shooter." The crowd fell silent, their eyes shifting between the stranger and Tala. The challenge was far from over. Now the real test would begin. The saloon was still buzzing with excitement, but the stranger knew the hardest part was just beginning. He had won the right to face Tala, but he could see in her eyes that this victory meant nothing unless he proved himself worthy. The cheers of the crowd faded away as the weight of his next challenge settled over him. Tala stood in the corner, watching him intently, her arms crossed over her chest. She was tall and strong, her face a mix of beauty and hardened resolve. The stranger could see the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had burned through every challenge she had ever faced. He knew that he had only begun to earn her respect. The bottles had been a test of skill, but winning her heart would be a test of something deeper, something more than just shooting. Without saying a word, Tala turned and walked toward the saloon door. The crowd parted to let her pass, but the stranger did not follow her immediately. Instead, he stood still for a moment, considering what he had just done. Breaking the bottles had been easy enough for him. His hands had been steady, his aim precise. But this woman, this Cheyenne warrior, was not like anyone he had ever met. She was no prize to be won with tricks or skill. Tala stepped out into the fading light of the evening, and the stranger followed her. The wind had picked up, and dust swirled around their feet as they made their way through the town. The people of Red Rock had already begun to disperse, leaving the two of them alone in the growing silence. Tala stopped in front of a small cabin at the edge of the settlement. It was simple, with weathered wooden walls and a small porch. A single horse grazed nearby, its coat dark against the setting sun. Tala turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Do you know what you've just won?" she asked, her voice steady but full of challenge. The stranger hesitated for a moment before answering. "I won your challenge." That's what the old man said. "I broke every bottle. Now I'll face you." Tala raised an eyebrow, clearly not impressed. "You think it's that simple?" she asked. "You think breaking a few bottles means you've earned anything?" The stranger's jaw clenched. "Then what do you want from me?" Tala took a step closer. "I want to know if you're truly capable. I want to see if you're a man who only knows how to shoot or if you can be something more." The stranger's brow furrowed, and he felt a strange sense of frustration. He'd been through battles on distant planets, fought enemies who were faster, stronger, and smarter than he ever thought he could be. But standing here now, in front of Tala, he felt unsure. He knew how to fight, how to survive. But this wasn't about survival. This was about something deeper, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Tala reached for her horse's reins and mounted the animal with ease. She looked down at him, her gaze sharp. "Follow me," she said, turning the horse toward the hills beyond Red Rock. The stranger, after a brief hesitation, followed her, his boots kicking up dust as he walked. He had no idea where they were going, but something told him that this journey was about to teach him more than any gunfight ever could. They rode in silence for a long time, the wind howling around them, the landscape stretching endlessly ahead. The hills rose like jagged teeth against the orange sky, and the farther they went, the more remote the land became. The town of Red Rock felt like a distant memory, swallowed up by the wilderness. Finally, after what felt like hours, Tala stopped her horse at the edge of a cliff. The view was breathtaking. Rolling hills and valleys stretched as far as the eye could see. The sky above was a deep purple, the last rays of sunlight fading into darkness. There was no sign of civilization here, just the vast untamed land. "Get off your horse," Tala commanded, her voice firm. The stranger hesitated for a moment, but then did as she asked. He dismounted, feeling the weight of the situation pressing on him. He had no idea what Tala had planned, but he knew that it wasn't going to be easy. Tala dismounted as well, her movements graceful and confident. She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "You think you're a man of skill," she said slowly, But skill isn't enough in this world. Not in the wild. Out here, you need something more. You need to know when to fight, when to run, and when to trust. The stranger's lips tightened. What are you saying? Tala's eyes softened slightly, but there was still a fire in them. I'm saying that you're not ready. Not yet. You've broken bottles. That's a small thing. But to earn my respect, you'll have to face what's coming. You'll have to prove that you can survive, that you're more than just a man with a gun. Before the stranger could respond, there was a sound behind him. Soft at first, then louder. He spun around just in time to see a group of riders appear over the ridge, moving quickly toward them. His hand instinctively went to his holster, but Tala raised a hand to stop him. They are not here for you, she said quietly, but they will test you. The riders, 5 of them, approached with purpose. The leader, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, pulled up his horse in front of Tala. His eyes scanned the stranger, sizing him up. You're the one who won the challenge, aren't you? The man asked, his voice cold. The stranger didn't answer immediately, his eyes narrowing. Tala looked at the man and then back at the stranger. These men are here to test your mettle. They'll see if you're truly capable. If you're going to survive out here, you need to face them. On your own. The stranger felt a surge of adrenaline, his mind racing. This was not what he had expected. He had thought Tala's challenge would be something else, something simple. But now, as the riders closed in, he realized that this was only the beginning. He would have to prove that he could survive in this wild land. He would have to fight, not just for Tala, but for himself. You ready? Tala asked, her voice steady. The stranger nodded, his hand tight on the hilt of his gun. It was time to face the real test. The riders stopped about 20 feet away from the stranger. They were rough-looking men, dressed in worn leather, their faces hardened by years of living in the wilderness. Their horses snorted and pawed at the ground, eager to be set free. The stranger could see that these men weren't here to chat. They were here to test him, just as Tala had warned. Tala stood off to the side, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She was silent, watching with intensity, like a hawk waiting for its prey to make the first move. The leader of the riders, a man with a scar down his cheek, dismounted with a slow, deliberate motion. His boots thudded on the dry earth as he moved toward the stranger. The air felt heavy, charged with the tension between them. You think you can just come in here and win her? The man spat, his voice low and dangerous. Breaking a few bottles doesn't make you a man, stranger. You've got to show you can handle yourself in the real world. He kept his eyes locked on the man, his hand resting lightly on the handle of his gun. He didn't know who these men were, but he could feel their hostility, could sense that they were looking for any excuse to make him back down. I'm not here to impress anyone, the stranger said quietly. I'm here to face the challenge. The man with the scar smiled a wicked smile, revealing yellow teeth. Well, then you're in luck. We're the challenge. Without another word, the scarred man lunged at the stranger, drawing a knife from his belt. It was a quick motion, a flash of steel aimed at the stranger's chest. But the stranger was faster. In one smooth motion he drew his own gun, the cold metal of the revolver familiar in his hand. He fired, the shot ringing out across the stillness of the hills. The man with the scar stumbled back, a look of shock on his face as his knife flew from his hand and landed in the dirt. "Get up, you coward!" one of the other riders yelled, his voice filled with rage. The stranger didn't say a word. He just stood there, his gun still in his hand, his stance firm. He had no interest in fighting them unless he had to, but he was ready. He had learned long ago that if you didn't stand your ground, you'd be buried under the weight of your own fear. The riders circled him now, each one on horseback, their eyes narrowed with malice. They were clearly testing his courage, seeing if he would back down. But the stranger stood firm, his gaze never leaving the man who had challenged him. Tala had remained silent through it all, watching with calm eyes. She had seen men try to prove their worth in this land, but only a few ever made it through. Most of them didn't have the strength to face the wild world outside the walls of Red Rock. The scarred man wiped the blood from his hand, where a small cut had opened up from the bullet's grazing. You got lucky, he muttered, his voice now laced with grudging respect. You're not dead, the stranger replied simply, his voice steady. The other riders moved in closer, sensing their leader's hesitation. They were used to men cowering before them, used to having the upper hand. But the stranger's calm demeanor, the way he stood his ground without flinching, unnerved them. Are you done? The stranger asked, his voice breaking the tense silence. The scarred man, now visibly angry, nodded sharply. For now. But this isn't over, stranger. You'll regret this. The stranger didn't respond. He simply holstered his gun, the sound of the leather snapping shut echoing in the stillness. He turned to face Tala, who had watched the confrontation without speaking a word. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that told him he had passed the test, but only just. The riders, their leaders still seething with anger, mounted their horses and began to ride off, the sound of hooves pounding against the earth fading as they disappeared over the ridge. The stranger stood still, his hand resting on the hilt of his revolver, ready for whatever came next. Tala finally spoke, her voice calm but full of a quiet strength. "You passed their test," she said, "but the real challenge is yet to come." The stranger turned to face her, a little surprised. He had expected her to say something different, something more like a congratulations. But instead she was as composed as ever. "What's the real challenge?" he asked, his voice steady. Tala walked toward him, her steps light but purposeful. "The wild," she said simply. "You've proven you can fight, but can you survive? Can you live in a world where every step could be your last?" The stranger nodded slowly. He had fought wars, faced down enemies far more dangerous than these riders, but there was something different about this challenge. It wasn't about just winning. It was about surviving, about proving that he could handle whatever came his way. Tala turned her horse and motioned for him to follow. "Come with me," she said. "The real test begins now." The stranger mounted his own horse without a word, following her into the hills. The sun had set, and the landscape was now bathed in the cold light of the moon. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of the wild. It was a world that had no mercy, a world that cared nothing for the man who lived in it. The stranger had learned that lesson long ago. But Tala was right. This wasn't about what he had done in the past. This was about what he could do now. They rode for hours, climbing higher into the hills, until they reached the edge of a vast open valley. The land here was barren, dotted with jagged rocks and sparse patches of grass. It was a place where only the toughest could survive, a place where the wind could strip a man's soul bare. "This is the real test," Tala said, stopping her horse at the edge of the valley. "Out here, there are no rules. No one's going to save you. You'll have to rely on yourself and what you know." The stranger looked out over the valley, feeling a surge of anticipation. This was what he had been waiting for. The challenge wasn't just about proving he could break bottles or face down a few riders. It was about surviving in a world that didn't care about him, a world that would chew him up and spit him out if he wasn't careful. "I'm ready," he said quietly, his voice filled with determination. Tala smiled slightly. "We'll see." The wind howled across the valley as the stranger and Tala rode deeper into the wilderness. The land stretched out in all directions, wild and untamed, just as Tala had promised. The stranger had fought battles on distant planets, but this was different. The land was alive, as if it could feel every step they took, every breath they drew. Tala rode in silence beside him, her expression hard to read. She hadn't spoken much since they entered the valley, and the stranger had learned to respect that silence. There was power in it, a strength that came not from words, but from the stillness that could speak louder than any shout. They rode for what seemed like hours, the sun sinking lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the land. The stranger felt the fatigue in his muscles, the heat of the day still hanging in the air, but he kept his focus. Tala was the guide now, and if he wanted to prove himself worthy of her respect, he had to keep moving, keep pushing forward. Finally, they came to a small creek that ran through the valley. The sound of water rushing over rocks filled the air, a welcome relief after the dry heat of the day. Tala dismounted first, tying her horse to a nearby tree. She looked over at the stranger, her eyes sharp as ever. "Rest for a moment," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We've been riding hard, and we'll need our strength for what's ahead." He had to admit, his body was starting to ache. He'd been pushing himself hard, but he knew that this journey wasn't just about testing his physical limits. It was about learning something deeper. Tala was showing him a side of the world he had never seen before, a side that wasn't about fighting or winning. It was about survival, about understanding the land and the creatures that called it home. As they sat by the creek, Tala spoke again. "The wild doesn't care about your strength, stranger. It doesn't care about your skills or your past. It will take what it wants, and you'll either survive or you won't." The stranger looked at her, his gaze steady. "I know that. I've fought in wars, faced things that would make most men run, but this is different." Tala met his gaze, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Different how?" "I don't know," the stranger said slowly. "There's something about this place. It's like it's alive, like it's watching us." Tala was silent for a moment. Then she nodded, as if she understood exactly what he meant. "It's not just the land that's alive, stranger. It's everything. the animals, the plants, the sky. It all speaks to those who listen. The stranger nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had always seen the land as something to be conquered, something to fight against, but Tala was showing him a different way. She was teaching him to listen, to understand, and to respect the world around him. The sound of hooves interrupted his thoughts, and he turned to see a large creature moving toward them. It was a wild horse, its coat dark and glossy, its eyes bright with intelligence. The creature paused for a moment, staring at them before it continued its journey, disappearing into the hills. Tala stood up, watching the horse with a look of admiration in her eyes. "That's a stallion," she said quietly. "They don't trust just anyone." The stranger was silent for a moment. "What does that mean?" "It means that you've earned something. Not from breaking bottles or fighting, but from learning to be still, to listen. The land responds to those who understand it." The stranger stood up as well, his heart beating a little faster. He had come here to win a challenge, to prove himself to Tala. But now, he realized, it wasn't about winning her heart with skill or strength. It was about something much deeper, something that had nothing to do with fighting, and everything to do with understanding. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Tala asked, her voice steady. The stranger nodded without hesitation. "I'm ready." Tala smiled then, a full, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Good, because the hardest part is still ahead." They mounted their horses again, the sound of hooves filling the air as they continued their journey. The valley stretched out before them, endless and beautiful. The land seemed to open up, offering them a glimpse of something greater, something they both could be a part of. As they rode, the stranger couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't something he had expected to find in a place like this, but it was there, quiet and powerful, like the land itself. Tala had shown him that true strength wasn't just about what you could do with your hands or what you could take from the world. It was about what you could give, what you could understand, and what you could protect. They reached the edge of the valley as night began to fall. The stars above them were bright and endless, a sea of light in the dark sky. The silence was overwhelming, but not in a way that felt lonely. It felt like they were part of something much larger, something timeless. Tala turned to the stranger, her expression softening. "You've earned my respect," she said quietly. The stranger looked at her surprised. "I didn't expect that." "I know," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "But you've done more than break bottles. You've learned to listen, and that's what makes you a true survivor." The stranger felt something stir within him, something that had been missing for a long time. It wasn't just the thrill of winning or proving himself. It was the understanding that he had found something far more valuable. A bond, a connection with this land, and with Tala. The journey had changed him, not just in how he saw the world, but in how he saw himself. They sat by the fire that night, the stars overhead and the sounds of the wild around them. It was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time in a long while, the stranger felt at home. He hadn't won Tala with skill or strength. He had won her respect by proving that he could truly understand the world she lived in, and in doing so, he had found something even more precious. As the fire crackled and the night stretched on, the stranger realized that he had gained more than he had ever expected from this journey. He had come seeking a challenge, but he had found a new way of living, a new way of being. And as he looked at Tala, sitting beside him by the fire, he knew that the real adventure had only just begun.